We did this. Okay, everyone. So Shavua Tov again, Sunday night. Tonight's daf in Masechet Chullin is daf Kufchet 108. It's a tough daf. Unfortunately for us, it doesn't really end at the end of today's daf. So tomorrow's going to be tough as well, but we're going to do our best. And we're going to start at the Mishnah, 3 lines at the top of daf Kufchet Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, and our parak is talking about milk and meat, basar b'chalav. So tipat chalav shenafla al chaticha. You have a drop of milk that falls onto a piece of meat. Let's assume, for purposes of ease simplicity, that things are batel b'shishim, right, which is around 1.7%. So let's say a drop of milk that's like 3% falls onto a piece of meat. So it's not batel. Says the Mishnah, im yesh ba benoten tam, if it can give taste be'oto chaticha asur, even though the pot might have 50 pieces of meat, the milk dropped on one piece. If it's enough to give taste to that piece, so it's 3% of that piece, let's say, then that piece is asur. What about the rest of the pot? Continues the Mishnah, ni'era takdeirat, then mix up the entire pot. Im yeshba benoten tam, b'oto kedera asur. If the milk will give taste into that whole pot, the whole dish, then it's asur. And the implication of the Mishnah is that if you mix up the pot and the milk, let's say again, you dropped 1 ounce of milk onto 50 ounces of meat. So it's not 1 in 60. It's not batel b'shishim. But the whole pot has 3,000 ounces of meat or whatever, just numbers. So then if you mix it up, it becomes batel. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaya, very interesting statement. Very interesting statement. Ta'amo v'lo mamasho ba'almad de'oraita. In general, when we say that something that gives taste but doesn't have presence is asur. For example, you take a piece of treif, right, a piece of pork, and you drop it into your chullin, and it gives taste to the chullin. It's less than 160, right? Or it's more than 160, whatever. It's not batel b'shishim. Then you take out the pork, and you have chullin left. Is that asur or mutter? It's asur, because the taste of the pork is in the chullin. But the fact that you have just ta'am, taste, and not mamashut, and not the physical presence, that it's prohibited, must be midoraita. That you view that as if the pig or the pork in this case is actually in the chullin. How do I know that? You might say it's drabanan. The source, of course, for this would be basar b'chalav. Because think about it. When you have basar b'chalav, right, you cook milk and meat together, and then you separate them, right? You take the meat out of the milk. The flavor of the milk is in the meat, but the milk is not in the meat, right? So if you say drabanan, that by other isurim, not basar b'chalav, it's an isur only midrabanan, mi basar b'chalav my time gamrinan. Why don't you compare it to basar b'chalav? If basar b'chalav, again, when you have milk and you have meat, and you mix them together, all you have in the meat is the taste. You don't have the presence, right? You don't feel the milk. You don't see the milk. Why wouldn't you compare the pork or other isurim to basar b'chalav? It must be because the chidushu. You must be because you would say, Rashi always claims, that basar b'chalav is a very big innovation. What's the big innovation of basar b'chalav? It's that you took two things, milk, which is perfectly permitted, meat, which is perfectly permitted, you put them together and they become asr. Unlike all other isurim, where you have a giranasha, or you have chelev, or you have treif, right, where you put it together and you're talking about the isur infecting the heter. Here you have two mutter things, put them together and they become asr. So maybe that's the only case where the Torah says the taste makes the whole thing asr, but not a regular prohibition, right? If that's true, ichidushu, then I would say if you go to our Mishnah, and Charlie I know joined a little late because he probably was at Marv, but our Mishnah's case was that you had a drop of milk that fell onto a piece of meat. And our Mishnah said, if it's been notain tam, it makes it asr. Why do you need to have taste? If basar b'chalav is this big chiddush, that even though you have one mutter thing, another mutter thing, they become together to make it asr, how do you know it needs to have taste? Maybe one drop of milk in 10,000 times meat would be asr also, right? Ichidushu, then afagav deleka notain tam. Then you wouldn't even need to have a taste, right? Nami. You wouldn't even need to have taste. And therefore, says Abaya, from the fact that our Mishnah requires you to have taste, It tells you that basar b'chalav is not so special. It's a regular halacha like everything else. And since the Torah very clearly says by basar b'chalav that the meat becomes usher if it's mixed with milk, even though there's essence of the milk inside of it, because you don't see the milk, that's true about every other isser. And so if you cook your, again, pork in your chullin, and you take out the piece of pork, the chullin is usher midoraita. That's Abaya's proof. Amalei Rava says, Rava, I don't think that's a proof at all. Because what are you saying? That if it was true that basar b'chalav was such a great innovation, you would even be usher if a drop of milk falls into 1,000 times meat, right? Because you don't need taste. That's not true. The reason that's not usher is derech bishul asra Torah. The Torah clearly says, lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo, 3 times, right? And so clearly the Torah cares about cooking it. When you cook things, you obviously only put something into your pot because you want it to affect the taste. So cooking, it would be accidental if you didn't affect the taste. And therefore, clearly you need to have taste in order to fulfill cooking, and therefore there's no proof, according to Rav, from the Mishnah. Okay, that's the first comment about basar b'chalav. Continues the Gemara Amar Rav. We had this last Shabbos, if you recall, last Motzei Shabbat. We learned the same Gemara, so it'll be a repetition for us, even though it was very hard then. It's going to be hard again today. Amar Rav, kivan shnatan tam b'chaticha, once the drop of milk falls into the piece of meat, again, Rashi's example we had last week, Rashi says it again here, is that, again, you have a stew, and the stew has 10 cubes of meat and gravy and other potatoes and all that kind of good stuff. But there's one piece of meat that's sticking up on top of the stew. It's not sunk inside. And you drop milk on top of that one piece. Says Rav, even shenatan tam bechaticha, once the milk has enough taste, meaning it's enough percentage to give taste to that one piece of meat, that piece of meat is basar b'chalav. And it becomes prohibited like a nevela, like any isser. Chaticha atzma naset nevela. And then, says Rav, oseret kol hachatichot kulan l'pnei she'en mina. It will then mix together with all the other 10 pieces of meat and prohibit all of them, even though the drop of milk was not enough to go into the 10 pieces of meat, but it was enough to go into one piece of meat, and it assered that piece of meat, and then it assered all the meat because min b'mino eno batel. Amar le Marzutra Breda Rav Mari the Ravina. Now, said Rav, this again, it's the same Gemara we had last week. Said Marzutra, I hope we have good connection. If I don't, please let me know. Your internet's not been great. Said Marzutra Breda Rav Mari to Ravina. Micht. I don't understand Rav's comment. Rav Kiman Amar L'Shmaite Reb Yehuda. Rav clearly is going like Reb Yehuda. Amar min b'mino lo batel. Right? Rav is going like Reb Yehuda says. Again, the case is, right? You guys hear me? I'm okay? Charlie, I think we're getting some background from you, or maybe I'm not working. But anyways, Rav's case is the following. You take a drop of milk, it falls on a piece of meat A. There's 20 other pieces of meat in the pot. The drop of milk would not be enough to asser the whole pot, for sure. It's a tiny bit. But it's enough to asser this one piece. Once that piece becomes asser, it mixes with all the other pieces, and min b'mino eno batel. Now, it says Marzutra, look, Rav clearly holds like Reb Yehuda, holds min b'mino lo batel, right? But I don't understand how this fits with what Rava said last week. Remember, we said this Gemara 1 week ago. Lema pliga ad Rava. The Amar Rava, because remember, Rava said last week that although Reb Yehuda says min b'mino eno batel, in a scenario where you have a min, a second min, and a third party, meaning the case again was where you had a piece of meat that was puzzle, that was usser, you had 10 other pieces of meat, and you had all the gravy and the stew and the potatoes and the carrots, which is obviously a davar acher. Rava said last week, Damar Rava, Kasavar Reb Yehuda, Kol shehu min umino v'davar acher. If you mix up something with one piece of meat, other pieces of meat, and a third thing like the gravy, what you do is, instead of saying that one piece of meat is aser and it asers all the other pieces of meat and therefore all the meat is aser, salek et mino k'misha, you imagine that the other pieces of meat are not in the pot for a minute, and you look at the non-meat parts of the pot and the meat that's aser, And as long as the non-meat parts of the pot are enough to overwhelm that little bit of isser, it'll be batal.
Like if it's like a whole challenge with lentils and beans, you could say
Yeah,
that.
potentially. So it has to be enough, right? So salek et mino kamisheino. Look, pretend. Don't say that it's min bumino and then it makes it all usr. Ignore the other piece of meat and she'eno mino rabba alav mivatlo. The extra, the other part, the gravy, or as Nava put it, the chullin, will overwhelm the isser of this little tiny bit of milk in this case, and be mivatel the milk. And so there's no basar b'chalav. Because even though the milk aser the piece of meat, that piece of meat then becomes batal in the gravy. And so the whole thing should be mutter. Says the Gemara, that's a good question, but he answered him the following. He said, Amar lei, you're right. If it fell into a thin sauce, meaning the sauce is not meat, it's made out of, all kinds of things that are fried down and are very thin, like the cholent you talked about, then hachanami, you'd be correct that this piece of meat, it's basar b'chalav, that's mixed with other meat and with the gravy, would be batal in the gravy. But here we're talking about a thick gravy, and Rashi explains a thick gravy means it's made out of meat. It's a meat sauce, basically. And so this gravy, because it's a meat sauce, is the same min, right? The gravy is not going to be mevatel because it's also made out of a lot of meat, and therefore it's min umino, and same min, there's no davar acher in this case. And that's why it's not batel. Ask the Gemara now, 8 lines, 10 lines from the bottom. The most complicated question we're going to have, probably for a long time. Umay kasavar, but what do they hold about the question of efshar l'sochato? Efshar l'sochato is an incredibly complex concept. It literally means you can squeeze something out. And the question is basically, again, I'm going to very much oversimplify it for the purposes of Daf Yomi and late night, which is that let's say you have a drop of milk that falls into a piece of meat, right? So the milk is 1 ounce of milk or even less. It's a drop. The meat is whatever, it's 50 times that. It's not batel because 50 to 1 is not batel. But then the meat is put into a pot. Do you say that that milk leaves the meat and then goes and makes the other pieces of meat pasul? Right? Does the milk or the isser inside that piece of basar b'chalav leave the basar b'chalav and go to the other parts? And that's very relevant because first of all, it can make them usser, but it can also make them mutter, right? Because let's say you have 2% in this thing, so it's pasul, but then if it leaves and it mixes in the rest of it, then it's not pasul anymore. Then the whole thing becomes kosher. So what does Rav hold about this issue? Because Ika Savar, if Rav holds Efshar l'sochato mutar, that when you squeeze out the Isser, the whole thing becomes mutar. So even though that one piece was Usser, when it now gets mixed with all the other pieces, the Isser goes out and now it's no longer 1 in 50, it's now 1 in 200. So then chaticha might not say nevela. Why would the piece of meat become usser? Right? I mean, the piece of meat is usser while there's milk inside of it, but once you mix it with the other pieces, the milk leaves it and it's no longer usser. It can change its status. Ella, clearly what Rav has to hold is kasavar efshar l'sochato asur. Rav holds that even if you put in a scenario where the Isser comes out of the piece, it remains Asr forever. And in fact, Itmar, Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Da'amri, Efshar l'sochato Asur. Rav, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan were a big trio who said that when you squeeze things out, it remains Asur, meaning you can never make this piece mutter again.
That makes sense.
And Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe and Reish Lakish, who were the three on the other side, the Amar Efshar l'sochato mutar, that in fact there's such a concept of Efshar l'sochato becomes mutar. Now Rashi Tosas points out, of course, b'diavad, right? It's not like you can take your piece of basar b'chalav and say, okay, I'll mix it into my challah, now everything will be mutar. But if you did it, if it happened without you realizing, according to all of these amoraim, it would be mutar. And Rav disagrees. So that's a machloket about Efshar l'sochato. Ask the Gemara, is that really true? This 4 lines from the bottom of Kufchet Amid Aleph. V'savar Rav, does Rav really hold Efshar l'sochato asur? Does Rav hold that if you squeeze out, meaning if you remove the Isser, it remains asur forever? Itmar, but what about the following case? You ready? Three lines on the bottom. Gezayit basar shenafal toch yoresha chalav. Unlike the case of our Mishnah, and this is a critical difference, where a drop of milk fell onto the meat, in this case, the drop of meat fell into a vat of milk. So you got a huge 100-gallon container of milk, and a guy's eating his sandwich, and his piece of meat falls into the vat, right?
Wait,
And it's one in a very small amount. Says Rav something very interesting. And remember, the vat is heated up, right? Because remember, it's only a syrup bishul. Amar Rav, basar asur. That piece of meat, if you fish out that piece of salami, it's asur because it's basar b'chalav. But chalav mutar. The milk is mutar. Now, why in the world is the milk mutar? We're assuming it's because there's so much milk that the meat does not give taste to the milk, right? It overwhelms it. Says but if Rav really holds that it remains asur when the thing leaves the mixture, chalav hamayim mutar. Why would the milk be mutar? Again, what happened here is a piece of meat fell into the milk. It absorbed a minuscule amount of milk, but enough milk to give taste, and it's now basar b'chalav. Then that milk leaves the meat, right? And it should passel all the other milk in the vat. So chalav hamayim mutar. Why don't you say it's chelav nevelahu? Why don't you say that the small piece of amount of milk that was mixed with the meat left the meat, and therefore it should passel all of the other milk because, as Rashi points out, it's min b'mino, right? It's milk in milk. And according to Rav, who holds like Rav Yehuda, min b'mino is asur. And so I understand that you have 100 times milk over meat, right? So the meat does not give a taste to the milk. So that's why the milk would be permitted if you took out the meat. But the fact that a little bit of milk gets absorbed into the meat and then gets polate, then gets kicked out of the meat, why isn't that little bit of milk asur and also asur all the other milk, according to this svara? Answers the Gemara, you're right, it's wrong. It's not a good question. L'olam, top of daf kufchet amabet, really kasava Rav, efshar l'suchato asur. In fact, Rav holds that if the milk leaves the meat, it should become asur. However, Rav has a very ingenious explanation, which we're only going to go with for 30 seconds, that Rav holds, Shani Hatam, that case is different, Damar Krab, because Rav holds that the pasuk says, Lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook a piece of a lamb in the milk of its mother. Gedi asra Torah, v'lo chelev. The milk is not asr. Would you imagine the svara, right? You're not allowed to cook meat in milk, but you can cook milk and meat all you want. Take your milk, cook meat in it. It has a delicious taste of, I don't know, of cows. And then you could just take out the meat, throw away the meat because it's basar b'chalav, and drink the milk. So according to Rav, there's no prohibition in the milk. There's only a prohibition in the meat. This is ridiculous, by the way, but that's, I don't know, it's not ridiculous, but it's far-fetched, and it's not how we paskin. So that is what Rav holds, that there's no prohibition in the milk. So again, if the meat was cooked with the milk and it absorbed a little bit of milk and then it exuded that milk, it doesn't matter because the milk is never asr. And that's why the rest of the milk is mutar. That's how we explain it now. That's ridiculous. No one really holds that. B'savar Rav gedi asrat Torah v'lo chalav, sorry, fifth line. Rav really holds that only the meat is asur and not the milk. But we have another statement of Rav which directly contradicts that. Because the statement is the following: Chatzi zayit basar, the chatzi zayit chalav. Let's say, right, the Torah says don't cook milk with meat. Now, how much milk and how much meat? So obviously it has to be a kazayit, because nothing is asur without a kazayit. But what if you have half a zayit of meat and half a zayit of milk, and you mix them together? How do you have half a zayit of milk, since milk is a liquid?
cheese.
No. So Rashi always explains that what you do is basically use, you take the liquid and you see how much it displaces, right? I'm sorry, you take the solid, take a kazayit, you pour it into a cup and see how much milk falls out the side, and that's a kazayit of milk.
A lot of effort.
Not so much effort. It's pretty typical. Okay. Anyways, so let's say you have half a zayit of milk and half a zayit of meat, and you're bishlan zemzeh, and you cook them with each other. Remember, we haven't gone through this yet, I don't think. I don't remember actually. But the Isser Basar B'chalav, remember, it says it three times, right? Lo tavashal gedi b'chalev mo. And everyone knows what Rashi says, which is our Gemara. One is to tell you you're not allowed to cook milk and meat. One is that you're not allowed to eat milk and meat. And the third is that
Benefit.
you can't get hana'ah. Very good. You can't get benefit from milk and meat. So let's say you cook half a kazayit, Charlie agrees. You cook half a kazayit of chalav, half a kazayit of basar. Says the statement, Shebishlan zemze amarav lokeh al achilato. Says Rav, you would get makot for eating that kazayit. Because even though it's a mixture of half a kazayit of meat and half a kazayit of milk, the kazayit that's complete would be usher to eat, and you get makot for eating a kazayit. But eino lokal bishulo. You don't get makot for cooking it. Now, we don't know why. We'll see that in a little bit. Why wouldn't you get makot for cooking it?
Worse.
It is, but it's not a kazayit. You only had half a kazayit and half a kazayit. Now, but before we ask why eating and cooking would be different, ask the Gemara, but if you just said to me that Rav doesn't care if you drink the milk. So what do you mean? You ate half a kazayit of basar. Yeah, it's only half a kazayit. Chalav, I keep saying chalav. If the Torah asked the meat and not the milk, so why would you get makot for eating? Achila, my lucky, chatzi shiru. You only ate half a kazayit. Ella, obviously, like we've always learned since we were 2 years old, Lolam kasavar rav chalav nami asar. The milk is also asar. So what we told you before is a little bit ridiculous. So what? So I'm going to go back and I'm going to repeat the question. Sorry, the question again was, you have a drop. Sorry, you have a drop of meat that falls into a huge vat of milk. Okay, so Rav said the meat becomes usser because the milk obviously gives taste to that meat, but the milk does not become usser because the tiny bit of meat does not give taste to that milk.
Oh, it's because
So our question was, why isn't the milk usser? If the meat absorbs some of the milk, that milk becomes basar b'chalav, and then it gets exuded out, and it's not batel because it's min b'mino. Why doesn't that small amount of milk usher the entire pot of milk? It says Gemara, there's a whole different reason, and the reason is that we're talking about a case where the pot is boiling. So let's read that inside. Kigon hacha b'mayaskinan ulolam kasavarav chalav nami aser. Hacha b'mayaskinan kigon shenafal letoch yoret rotachat. It fell into a boiling vat of milk, and when the milk is boiling, it is so energized and focused on giving itself to something it doesn't absorb. The mivla bala, mifla lo palat. The meat will absorb the milk because the milk is boiling, but the meat will not give back. It won't extrude out milk because it's such a high pressure and cooking environment. Okay, that might be true in the first second, but over time the fire is going to go out. Sof kinayich, when things calm down and it stops boiling, then the meat is going to give off its milk into the rest of the pot. Hadar pullet, it's going to kick out its milk. This is where you're right. The case has to be where you took out the piece of meat while it was still boiling. Kishakadam bisilko, where you took out, so it's a crazy case, but this is Rav's case, where you dropped the piece of meat into a boiling vat of milk. You immediately took out that piece of meat. The meat is usher because it absorbed the taste of the milk. The milk is not usher because the tiny piece of meat can't make it usher. So that is what Rav was saying. Now, Gufa, let's go back to the statement that Rav just made of Chatzi Zayit Basar. We're around 12 lines down. If you have half of a zayit of meat and Chatzi Zayit Chalav, and you have half a zayit of milk, Shebishlan Zemzen, you cook them together. Amar Rav lokal achilato ve'ena lokal bishulo. You get makot for eating that combination because it's a kazayit, but you don't get makot for cooking it. This doesn't make any sense. Manavshach. Which way are you leaning? What do you mean? Imitzdarfinan, if half and half are combining, then a bishul nami lucky, right? You should get makot for bishul. Ilo mitzdarfinan, if they don't combine, meaning you need a kazayit of one and a kazayit of the other before it becomes asur, then achila nami lo lucky. You shouldn't get makot for eating it. Answers the Gemara, you're right. It's 100% true. There isn't really a distinction between eating and cooking. The only distinction is that when you cook, you generally cook with larger amounts. And lo'olam, what Rav holds is lo mitzdarfi, that half a kazayit and half a kazayit is not combinable. Meaning, in order to be asr for basar b'chalav, you need a kazayit of meat and a kazayit of milk. However, if you have a kazayit of meat and a kazayit of milk and you cook them together, and then you have a combination that's two kazaitim, and then you eat one zayit of that, which is half of each, then you're over basar b'chalav. Because since by cooking it, you made it basar b'chalav, you ate a kazayit, not a half a zayit of milk and half a zayit of meat. You ate a kazayit of basar b'chalav. So that's what Rav is pointing out. Biba miyoreg gedola. We're talking about where it comes from a big pot. The pot has 20 zaytim of meat and 20 zaytim of milk, and you take out a tiny bit that's a kazayit, even though that little bit only has half and half, you'd be chayav. But it's true that if you originally just took half a kazayit of meat and half a kazayit of milk and you cooked them together and ate them, you'd be patur. You'd be patur for cooking it, you'd be patur for eating it. Okay? Because it's not basar b'chalav unless you start off with over a kazayit in each side. That is Rav's opinion. Levi says, I disagree with that whole thing, halfway down. Af lokal bishulo. I hold that you even get makot for cooking, half a zayit of meat and half a zayit of chalav. The Cheintani Levi b'matzita. Levi actually taught it in a Mishnah and a Braita. Kishem shelokal achilato. Just like you get makot for eating one kazayit that's made up of half meat and half milk. Kach lokal bishulo. You'd be chayiv on cooking half a zayit of milk and half a zayit of meat. Ube'eze bishul amru. With what kind of cooking is it asr? Meaning, how much do you have to cook it in order for it to be considered to be basar b'chalav? It has to be b'bishul shachirim ochlinoto machmat bishulo. It's talking about a case where other people would eat it, right? Meaning it's considered to be fully cooked, or that's what Rashi says here. Elsewhere, Rashi gives a point that it can be partially cooked, but either way, it has to be edible. So cooking is not just starting to cook; it's making food that people would eat. Now, obviously, acherim Rashi points out is non-Jews, because Jews would not eat basar b'chalav. But we're talking about where it's edible, and that's considered to be bishul. Okay, last thing we're going to learn today, which unfortunately it actually goes to the Mishnah tomorrow, but we cannot go to the Mishnah because that'll ruin tomorrow's daf. So we're going to do the first part of this, but you'll probably review much of this tomorrow, which is this question of efshar l'sochato. The question of, again, the question of efshar l'sochato means, can Isser be squeezed out? Again, and the case is, the simplest case is you have a liquid of milk, a droplet of milk that falls onto a piece of meat where it's not batel, right? The meat becomes basar b'chalav. It then is mixed around in the pot with 20 other pieces of meat. Do you say that that milk leaves the piece of meat and makes the other pieces of meat pasul, or only that one piece of meat becomes pasul? So that's efshar l'sochato mutar or asur. And of course, it matters because if efshar l'sochato is that the meat, the liquid goes out of the meat to make things mutar, it means that it could then become batel in the big pot, right? Because it's only 2% milk in this one piece. Once it mixes with 10 other pieces, it's 0.2% milk, and therefore it's batel. So that is the question. Says the Gemara, 12 lines from the bottom, the question of efshar l'sochato atzmo, the fundamental question about whether we view things as being squeezed out, Tanai. In fact, that's a machloket Tanaim, the Tanya. Says the following Braita, which is an expansion on our Mishnah. Says the Braita, Tipat chalav shenafla al chaticha. Okay? Again, this was our Mishnah. You have one drop of milk that falls onto a piece of meat. Kivan shenatna tam bechaticha. Once that milk is enough to give taste to that chaticha, meaning it's 2%, hachaticha atzma naseit nevela. That piece of meat becomes a aser quantity. It's basar b'chalav or nevela, right? It's aser. Ve'oseret kol chatichot kulan. It will then aser all the other pieces in the pot. Nipnei shehin mina, because this is a piece of meat and those are pieces of meat. And min b'mino eino bato divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, we saw that opinion already. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Chachamim omrim, say the Chachamim, I disagree. The only time that drop of milk will aser the food is ad shetitain tam berotav ubekipa ubechatichot. That drop of milk has to be enough to give a taste to the entire stew, including the other pieces and the scraps on the bottom and the gravy inside the stew. So you don't view it like Rabbi Yehuda, that it's viewed as being asering one piece and then that piece asers everything else. You look at the entire pot, okay? Now, we have no idea what the case is it a case where the piece was separate? Is it mixed together? So let's try to figure that out. Says Rebbe, 7 lines from the bottom, I don't agree with Rebbe Yehuda. I don't agree with the Chachamim. I agree partially with each one. Nir'in divrei Rebbe Yehuda b'sheloni er shelokisa. I agree with Rebbe Yehuda that the drop goes into that piece and answers that piece if you didn't cover the pot and you didn't mix the pieces up together, so that that milk dropped into one piece and therefore it's completely in that piece, and that's what you view it. So I agree with Rabbi Yehuda in that case. And like what I was going to say in a second, clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds it even not in that case, right? He's saying I agree with Rabbi Yehuda only if you didn't cover it and you didn't mix it. Implication being that Rabbi Yehuda will hold that the whole thing is usher even if you did mix it and cover it. That's what Rebbe says first. And says Rebbe, 6 lines from the bottom, I agree with the Chachamim that it's mutter b'sheni'er v'kiseh when you do mix it together and cover the pot, because then that drop of milk, you don't view it as touching one piece of meat, you view it as being in the whole pot. Says Gemara, that's a nice thing to say, Rebbe, but exactly what's the circumstance? My lo ni'er v'lo kisa. What do you mean you agree with Rabbi Yehuda if you didn't mix the pieces and you didn't cover the pot, right? Because then a drop of milk fell just into one piece. Ileman lo ni'er klal v'lo kisa klal. If you didn't touch the pot, you didn't mix it at all, you didn't cover it, so there's no steam coming on top of it. So then why in the world would Rabbi Yehuda say, sorry, why in the world would Rebbe say that it's usher mivla bala, right? That first piece absorbed the milk, but miflat lo pollen. It never pushed it out to the other pieces because you didn't touch the pot. Nothing moved. So when did it go the other direction? When did it go from one piece to the next pieces? Ella, what Rebbe must mean is, I agree with Rebbe Yehuda that it's usher if you're lo ni'er b'tchila ela b'sof. What it means is, at the first minute, you drop the milk into this one piece. You didn't mix it right away, because if you mixed it right away, then you would view it as being in the whole pot. You let it get absorbed into that piece, and then you mixed it. So you basically got absorbed into that piece, and then you spread it in the whole pot. So you didn't mix it in the beginning, but you mixed it subsequently. Lo kisa batchila, you didn't cover it right away. Ela b'sof, you covered it later. Says Gemara, I don't understand. If you say that efshar l'sochato, right, is mutar, the same way the milk went into piece number one and then you mixed it up, it should go into all the other pieces and should become batel. Amai, why does Rebbe say it's usher to eat all the pieces? Habala, hapalat. That drop of milk went into piece A, and then when you mix it together, it left piece A, went into all the other pieces and became batel. It must be efshar l'sochato, kasavar, he must hold, efshar l'sochato is asur. It must be that Rebbe holds that because even when that milk leaves that first piece, it remains asur, and the whole thing becomes asur. And what you see from here is, I'm going to do one more line, 1 second. Michlal, Chaf Kuftet Amid Aleph, to Rebbe Yehuda Savar. Now, what you see from here is that Rebbe says, I hold like Rebbe Yehuda's opinion, if you initially let the drop fall, you didn't mix it, so it became usr, and then you mixed it up, right? Then it spreads the isser throughout the whole pot. But Rebbe Yehuda himself holds that even if you never ever mixed it, even if you mixed it right away, it would be usr. Michlal Rebbe Yehuda Savar, ki ni'er mitchila v'ad sof, the kisa mitchila v'ad sof, it would also be asur, right? Rebbe is saying, I hold like Rebbe Yehuda, if you didn't mix it right away, so that the drop of milk got absorbed and assured the piece of meat. Then you mixed it, it spread isser to the whole thing. But Rebbe Yehuda holds you don't even need to have that first step. You could be mixing it the whole time. You drop the milk in, the milk touched one piece first. You're mixing the whole thing. Says Rebbe Yehuda, the whole thing is usher. Why is the whole thing usher? Amai, halo bala klal. It didn't get absorbed into that piece at all because you're mixing it constantly. Answers the Gemara, you're right. The midoraita, probably it's not a problem, but Rebbe Yehuda is worried that you didn't do a good job of mixing it. Ema lo nier yafeh yafeh, v'lo kisa yafeh yafeh. Rebbe Yehuda is worried that you didn't mix it properly. And so therefore, what Rebbe is saying is the opinion of Efshar l'sochato is asur, and Rebbe Yehuda agrees with that opinion, which is that if one drop of milk falls into one piece of meat and you don't mix it right away, this is Rebbe's opinion, that makes that piece of meat basar b'chalav. If you then mix that up to the whole rest of the pot, it will spread basar b'chalav to the whole pot because efshar l'sochato is asur. Tomorrow we're going to see that we think the Chachamim hold that it's mutar because that little bit of basar b'chalav liquid is going to leave that piece and get diluted into the rest of the pot because efshar l'sochato is mutar. We're going to have to stop at Amar Mar, 4 lines on the top of Kuftet Amud Aleph, and till a few hours from now, God willing, we'll learn tomorrow morning. Some of us together. So Shavua Tov, very complicated daf, but we got this. And
This is better than Kiran Hamsha.
Charlie, you're muted. Maybe my sound is off.
That was my nightmare when I was doing the halacha class.
This is really Efshar l'sochato is probably the hardest, to be honest.
It
It's not
is.
the hardest, it's one of because what I obviously passed over is what are the proportions, what's the timing, what does the cover mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does mixing mean? None of these things are well defined, and you can argue about all of it. So
Right. Anyway,
very good. Have a good night, everyone.
thank you. Shavua Tov.
Yashikol, thanks for doing it at night.
Yeah.
Thank you and good night.